Hey everyone, my name's Brendan. I hope your day's been going good, and not to alarm you, but something here is different now. I'm missing plastic. More specifically, a lot of my retro plastic. Hold on a second, Brendan. Does this mean you finally gave in to Bert T. Turtley's demands and decided to destroy all of your retro games in a geeky rage?
You better have!
Well, not exactly. Welcome to the Retro Corner, aka Epson's Alcove, aka the Virginity Vacuum, aka the Bitch Bubble, I'm the Bitch, aka CRT, no sex for me, aka the All-Nighter Enclosure, aka the Dweeb Den, aka Let's Not Get Late Today Lounge. Let's just call it the Retro Corner. We've got all sorts of things back here, not all of which is retro, which you might be thinking kinda defeats the purpose of it being a retro-themed area. Well, to that I say, well, yeah, where the hell else am I supposed to put Bulborb eating nude Shaggy? That aside, we've got some older game consoles here, my retro game collection, some miscellaneous game merch, and we've even got what I like to refer to as the Leaning Tower of Gubble. It's a work in progress. Well, to celebrate such a monumentous occasion, I think we need to make our topic today something special, but what should we start with? The Fun Box. The Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES for short. Everyone knows about this thing, and if you don't, then do you really exist? Hey man, I just got this NES from a garage sale. I was wondering if you wanted to test it out with me and see if it worked.
What's an NES? Oh. Is that a comedian? Is that a politician? Is that a new one of those oh no. Phones? What is that? Oh, what are you on about? You have to speak up. I can't hear you. Ah!
Everyone, and I mean everyone, knows what the NES is, but why is that? I can think of a few reasons. The video game crash of 1983 is what is probably the lowest point the video game industry has and will ever reach. Waning interest, lack of quality control for both consoles and games, all the while these huge amounts of mediocre to downright bad games flooded the market. A lot of people like to blame this whole crash on the game E.T. for the Atari 2600, which I mean, is a fair assumption to make considering they literally asked people who bought the game to give it back so they could go bury them out in the middle of the desert. That probably wasn't a great look for video games, not gonna lie. There were a lot of other games at this time though that just, well, how do I put this, were shit. There just wasn't any quality control, man. People could release whatever the hell they wanted for whatever price they were feeling funny about that day, and there weren't any really great games to balance all of it out. Game-centric companies were losing massive amounts of money, and it honestly seemed like gaming would just die out, living on as a brief fad instead of what we know it as today. However, there was one Japanese gaming company who one day said, "F it, give Americans the funny game box," and would go on to single-handedly save the industry. That company being Nintendo. Alright, so Nintendo's been around for a long time now, about 132 years in fact. Goddamn. The company originally started out making Hanafuda playing cards and found great success with those. The company would eventually try branching out into other ventures as well. Taxi cabs, vacuum cleaners, the food industry, love hotels. Would you believe me if I told you they all failed? There was one exception to this though, as Nintendo would eventually find great success in the toy industry, all thanks to a man named Gunpei Yokoi and his many brilliant toy ideas, the first of which being the Ultra Hand. Eventually, Gunpei Yokoi ran into the Nintendo offices one day like, "LCTs are the future, bitches!" and would lead to the creation of the Game & Watch line of systems starting in 1980, leading the company down the path of video game related products that they're on today. Around this time, Nintendo also tried getting into the video game market in some other ways as well, like with a few Pong consoles, as well as variants of that console dedicated to specific games, like with the TV Game Computer and TV Game Racing. Nintendo also of course had their arcade machines as well, like with their smash hit game Donkey Kong that released in 1991. After the huge success of the Game & Watch systems and Donkey Kong though, Nintendo made plans to create a full-fledged video game console. The original plan started out to be a 16-bit system that would essentially serve as a full-fledged computer, using stuff like a keyboard and a floppy disk drive. However, Nintendo's president at the time, Hiroshi Yamauchi, wasn't on board with the idea. In fact, he reportedly looked the man who came up with the idea in the eyes, grabbed him by the throat, and with his eyes set ablaze, he spoke in an ancient tongue which roughly translated to, "Make it cheaper, bitch ass." Yamauchi did actually want to go with a cheaper cartridge-based system, though, believing the home computer angle that they were originally going to go with to be too complicated for most consumers. Having a simple cartridge-based system like this would have just been a lot more consumer-friendly, and was ultimately the right decision to go with. The system was designed by Masayuki Uemura, basing the console's hardware on arcade machines and the ColecoVision, using the ColecoVision as a sort of basis and inspiration for their system. They wanted to surpass Coleco's console and have their own system's power match up more so with arcade cabinets like Donkey Kong, because if it can't run the ape, then is it really worth spending money on? As for the console's design and branding, the codename for it would be the Gamecom, but Uemura's wife apparently suggested the name Famicom because the game is about family time.
We're losing family time.
For the love of God, Tyree, I told you not to sneak up on me like that.
Upgrading to Wii U is.
Don't give me lip, Tyree. You know what you did.
With Wii Sports Club.
Tyree, we already went over this a year and a half ago. I don't care about Wii Sports Club. No, but seriously, the Famicom's a way better name. I'm glad they went with that. What if I told you that the Famicom color scheme was based off of Hiroshi Yamauchi's scarf and a billboard? The old red maroon bed frame of a console that we know and love, and oh my god, you can take off the backboards!
Elvis
Wait a second. That we know and love? I've never seen this thing before in my life. Where the fuck is the shoebox? Yes, the Famicom never actually released outside of Japan, at least not in the way you'd think. The Famicom was released on July 15th, 1993 in Japan to huge success, but wouldn't have a widespread release until 2 years later. When they brought it over though, why the f did they have to make it look like a shipping container? Like whenever I look at this thing, I half expect to see some worker from like a fucking Chili's or something carrying an order around on it.
Alright, so it says here we got the Cajun pasta with shrimp. Was that? Alright, so it says here we got the Cajun pasta with shrimp. Was that your order, sweetie? Alright, so it says you don't need a drink.
Is that a fucking NES?
So that old video game crash I mentioned before? Pretty nasty stuff, so Nintendo knew they were gonna have to try something different in order to get their console to sell over here in the US. The original plan was actually to team up with Atari in order to release the Famicom outside of Japan. You know, Atari, one of the leading contributors to the video game crash, that Atari? Man, this is gonna go great.
Okay guys, we need ideas and fast. Consumer faith is plummeting, sales are falling, stocks are dropping. We need something here. Does anyone have any ideas?
Oh, I got it. We make a mediocre at best home computer, continue to mass produce Cabbage Patch dolls, and then declare bankruptcy in 1988.
I think this talking computer's onto something.
Alright, Marv, get over here with that shovel already. We gotta bury this shit. Oh, quit your crying. We gotta get rid of the evidence.
Nah, even considering how they were contributing to the video game crash, Atari was by far the most iconic and recognizable video game company at this time, so teaming up with them was probably one of the safer bets Nintendo had if they were looking to create and market their own system here in the US. The two companies came to an agreement and planned to finalize the deal at the 1983 Summer Consumer Electronics Show, which would have led to the Famicom releasing in the US as the Nintendo Enhanced Video System. However, Atari took a glance at what Coleco was doing and were like, Donkey Kong. Coleco was demonstrating a prototype with the demonstrated that when the Coleco was making the games and they were making games and the Atari was like, you can't be making that game. We made it with Nintendo stuff. You can't we get that game.
You weren't supposed to see back here.
Coleco was demonstrating a prototype of Donkey Kong on their upcoming home computer, the Coleco Atom, and considering the deal Atari made with Nintendo, they were a little bit peeved to see a Nintendo game going onto one of their competitors' featured systems. Coleco had a license to put Donkey Kong on their home console, the ColecoVision, but when it came to home computers, Atari had an exclusive license for the game. Atari, believing Nintendo to be working with Coleco behind their back, canceled the deal last minute. The issue would eventually be cleared up between the two companies, but there would still be conflict from the fact that, 1. In this deal Atari would be handling the hardware side of things while Nintendo handled software for it, Atari believing it to be a raw deal on their end. 2. Atari believed their upcoming 7800 console to be better than what Nintendo was offering. Yeah, sure, keep telling yourself that, Atari. And 3. Atari's CEO Ray Kasser was fired due to some internal issues, so the deal never ended up going through after that. Nintendo was on their own at this point, creating a version of the Famicom to bring over to the United States.
So this is the part where they create the NES, right?
No! Nintendo's next attempt at making this console wasn't like the NES that we know now at all. If it ever actually went onto store shelves, it would have been called the Nintendo Advanced Video System. Advanced, not enhanced, they're different I swear, resembling something more like a home computer than a video game console. Home computers around this time started becoming a more popular and prevalent thing, so trying to market their new video game console as one was a pretty smart idea. The system would include a keyboard, tape deck, light gun, and even controllers that used infrared in order to make them wireless. This is 1984. So, Nintendo showed the system off at the Winter and Summer Consumer Electronics shows, where audience responded with the solid The advanced technology and ambitious ideas was acknowledged by those who saw the system, but there was one fact that kept it from greatness. It was a video game system. During the video game crash, and people were worried it would flop, so a total of 0 retailers ordered the system. Yikers! Sicking everything they'd learned so far, Nintendo figured the best way of going about marketing the system wasn't as a video game console, but rather as a toy. Nintendo knew that if they tried to market this thing like a video game console, then it would probably just flop due to an already oversaturated market. So, Nintendo, taking into account all of the experience they'd gained from their successes and failures over the years, made one of the best moves they possibly could. They completely redesigned the Famicom and released it in the US on October 18th, 1985 under the new name of the Nintendo Entertainment System, so as to differentiate itself from a normal game console. Looking back on the earlier marketing for the NES, you can definitely tell how much Nintendo is trying to get the point across that
It's not a video game console, we swear. Just look at it. It can hold bread.
no aspect of the marketing was as more prominent though than with stuff like the NES Zapper, Power Pad, and Rob the Robot. These things were practically screaming, "I'm not a video game, oh just please buy me, fucking buy me, oh please, oh please." And we did.
Ah! Hey, kiddos, look at this cool gun we made. It can kill ducks. I fucking hate ducks!
These more unique products that tied in with their games really helped to differentiate themselves from other video game companies at the time. Nintendo's plan had worked, and many people were referring to the NES as a toy just as much as they did a video game system. Throughout its life, the NES would have multiple bundles, usually including one of these add-ons in order to make it seem more toy-like. In fact, the way the console launched was designed to do just that. The first one was the Deluxe Bundle, which was actually just the base set and only way of buying the console at first, since this is obviously when they were still working overtime to make sure it looked more like a toy than anything else. This version of the NES came with the console itself, 2 controllers, Duck Hunt and the Light Gun, and Rob the Robot and Gyromite. With the power of Nintendo, you too can now fight off a robot hatching from your TV. I've seen some different prices for what this thing was going for back in the day, but it generally seems like it went between $139.99 to $159.99, which would be around $370 to $420 today. A little while after the system started picking up steam, they would release the NES on its own as the Control Deck, only including the console and controllers with no game. Did you know you could buy Rob on his own? Like no games, no extras, just Rob. Create an army, start an uprising, you cannot defeat us. The next notable version of the NES to release would be the Action Set in 1988. This is probably the most iconic of the NES bundles to come out, including the NES, 2 controllers, the light gun, and a dual cartridge with Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt. If you own an NES, there's a good chance that this is the one you own, as Nintendo eventually just started treating this as the base edition of the console. It was a decent price and came with 2 games, one of which utilized the light gun, giving the NES more of that toy-like look. These are probably what I consider to be the main 3 bundles, if you can even call this a bundle, to come out for the system. This was the first release, this was the standard version, and this was the most popular one. Aside from these though, there were still a few more to come out. Up next in 1989 was the Power Set, which included the console, controllers, the light gun, a cartridge containing Super Mario Bros., Duck Hunt World Class Track Meet, and the main draw of this version, the Power Pad. This is the NES bundle that was marketed to the true jock within all of us.
It's time to get fit, get ripped, it's time to get jacked, and don't look back!
These These next two are actually pretty similar to each other. We have the Sports Set, which was released in 1990, with the thing setting it apart being a copy of Super Spike Volleyball and Nintendo World Cup, as well as the Satellite, Nintendo's 4-player wireless adapter. Apparently this thing actually works pretty well, so long as something isn't blocking the infrared connection. You know what? I take back what I said earlier, Nintendo. Nice fucking job. Here's a golden sticker. Oh wait, it takes 6 C batteries to work? No, never mind. I'm sorry, but I gotta take that back. Oh god, wait, no, I'm sorry, you can keep it. You're a good noodle. The other bundle similar to this was the Super Set, which was only released in Europe, because it was just too much for the rest of the world to handle. This one came with a 3-pack of Super Mario Bros, Tetris, and Nintendo World Cup, and instead of including the Satellite, this one included the 4-Score, a wired 4-player adapter that came out a year after the Satellite. Aside from these, there are also some other versions of the console to release with minor differences, having stuff like an official Nintendo Player's Guide or another game bundled in, like with the challenge set in Super Mario Bros. 3. Having so many different versions of the console like this that include these toy-like accessories really helped Nintendo get the idea across that this was more of a toy than it was a video game console, being one of the main contributing factors to the system's success. Aside from just bundles, the console would also get a revision in 1993, this time being a top-loader. The system was made largely to be a cheaper version of the NES, only retailing for about $50 at the time, along with fixing some of the issues that the original NES had, like with how finicky it could be sometimes getting a game cartridge to read on the system. These cartridges and the system itself could be really annoying at times trying to get a game to work, which would lead to everyone playing them like a pan flute. Okay, so I'll try and keep myself from going into a rant, but my god, the original NES and subsequently the NES cartridges can be a pain in the ass to get working correctly. You might have to clean the pins of the cartridge, the pins in the system itself. It could generally just be a hardware issue and you need to take it apart and fiddle with it or go and actually get it repaired. You might have to wiggle it around, shake it, not blow into it because that'll damage it, hit it with a hammer, maybe it'll end up working, just kind of depends. The main issue with the revision though was that there was no composite port on the system and it only took RF, meaning that at times instead of your TV looking like this, it would look like this. There were some models with AV out on them after customers complained about the issue back in the day, but these are few and far between and extremely rare to find. Well, I mean, unless you were living in Japan where it was literally called the Famicom AV and did actually include AV out. If you're living outside of Japan though, you could go f*** yourself. You could always get it custom modded with AV out, but that costs money and I don't know how to do that myself. But enough about the stuff that came with the console and the revisions it had. What about the console itself? What's it got hiding under the hood? Let's crack it open and check it out. Oh my god, Luigi, that's where you've been hiding. I haven't seen you in years. Like I said earlier, the NES took a lot of inspiration from arcade machines, essentially just wanting to make the console a way of bringing the arcade experience to your home. Power-wise, the NES was an 8-bit console. The most nostalgic of bits. Okay, Drewdan, but do you even know what a bit is?
Well, yeah, of course I do. Who do you take me as? The bit is most common information in computing and digital communications. The name is a portmanteau of binary digit. The bit represents a logical state.
The NES was designed in a way that made it almost look like something akin to a VHS player, adding on to that not a video game feel Nintendo was so desperately going for. Instead of being a top loader like many of its competitors were, the NES had a flip open door for the cartridge slot, and you'd pop it in just like you would a VHS tape. The NES is also equipped with 2 controller ports and both RF and AV ports.
So many options, how do I choose?
The last notable thing going on with the design of the NES is the expansion port on the bottom. Although it was never fully utilized, there were actually some attempts to get some use out of it. The first of these attempts actually relates to the release of a device on the Famicom and the attempt at bringing it to the US, being a modem that would connect to the internet and allow people to do stuff like see video game cheats, jokes, weather forecasts, and everyone's favorite, gambling! The NES was marketed towards kids. Why do you think this thing never left Japan? There was, strangely enough, another attempt at using this thing for gambling, where residents of Minnesota would have been given an attachment that went into the NES expansion port, allowing them to connect to the state lottery and participate. The lottery industry is looking for ways to expand its horizons, said executive with the Control Data Corporation, Connie Scoven.
The kids want better horse races, damn it!
The last attempt to get any use out of this thing came from two dudes, Keith Rupp and Nolan Bushnell. One of these dudes was the co-creator of Pong and co-founder of Atari. Together, these two would create the Teleplay modem, with Bushnell later dropping out of the project. It would have allowed the NES to utilize online play and also be compatible with SNES and Genesis games. Rupp and his company, Bant Technologies, were having financial troubles during the device's creation. This, combined with Nintendo and Sega refusing to license the thing, and Sega trying to team up with AT&T to make something similar, which also never went anywhere, resulted in the Teleplay modem never coming to be. The equivalent to this expansion port on the Famicom was just used for peripherals like the light gun and family trainer pad, since the controls were permanently attached to the system, unlike with the NES. Not as exciting as illegal gambling, I know, but we gotta take what we can get here, okay? When Nintendo wanted to add a larger peripheral or add on to the Famicom, they would usually just use the cartridge slot, like with the Famicom Disk System. Released on February 21st, 1986, the Famicom Disk System would allow the console to play games saved onto disc cards. At the time it was made, Nintendo was having a hard time keeping up with the demand for their games. Saving games to these discs would allow Nintendo to make games cheaper and in a larger quantity, all the while having stuff like save features be even more possible than it would be otherwise with a cartridge. Oh these consoles got video games!
Have you ever heard of Super Mario Bros? Metroid? The tale of young spandex lad cloaked in green?
Bro, Nintendo had some great games on this system. While we might look back at them with a more nostalgic lens now, loving them more so for what they represent in the respective series rather than their overall quality, the games Nintendo put out on the NES and Famicom were revolutionary for their time. You look at Mario and you're like, yep, he's a jumping and a bobbing and look at him go, killing those tortoises. We all know the original Super Mario Bros. For being that old, classic 2D platformer that kickstarted the series into what we know it as today. It was simple, fun, and easy to understand, which is why it was such a huge success. If you're gonna start making games for your new console hot off the trail of the video game crash, you're gonna need something that can easily click with audiences.
Like, you just gotta get Mario from over here and over there. Okay, got it? Now go!
On top of it already just being really easy to understand, it also had a lot to offer. There were hidden blocks, secret warp pipes that take you to later parts of the game, well thought out and fun levels. It was a prime example for its time of how to just make a really solid video game. Even now people find fun in it through stuff like speedrunning. If the NES was the console that saved gaming, then Mario was the game that saved gaming. It probably didn't hurt that it was usually bundled with other games as well, only further increasing its popularity. Now, that's not to say that there weren't any other great games on the console either though. The Legend of Zelda provided newfound freedom and exploration that hadn't been seen in other games like this. Metroid had a similar freedom to it, but with its own twist that made collecting power-ups and abilities even more rewarding, and combined with later Castlevania games, would go on to create a whole new genre. Dragon Quest, known as Dragon Warrior in its localization, was the birth of the JRPG, and I don't know if you know this, but that's a pretty popular genre of game! You also had countless other arcade ports backing the system, with games like Contra, Balloon Fight, the Ninja Turtle arcade games, Battletoads, and Nintendo's own Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. that brought the arcade experience to your home. Other titles like the Megaman games, the Final Fantasy games, Kirby's Adventures, Startropics, Ninja Gaiden, Castlevania, Dr. Mario, Kid Icarus, Home Alone 2 sucks, but I'm gonna mention it anyways because it's funny, and best of all, the game where you can shoot ducks! Wow! The NES had some of the most iconic games of the time as part of its library, whether it be from the arcades or made specifically for the system. It brought these high-quality gaming experiences to the homes of players and created new games that would go on to be genre-defining for their time. One other aspect to Nintendo's games that helped them sell, at least at first, were the black box template for games. See, with the box art used for stuff like Atari games, the art can be really high quality and look really nice, but they're also today's word of the day. Okay, so it's not technically false advertising, but you'll look at the box art for Atari slot racers and then at the game itself. Yeah, the box art is obviously just an artist's interpretation of what the game is trying to represent. I'm not gonna sit here and act like you're not allowed to take creative liberties with this stuff, but some of it was just too different from what the game actually was. In comes Nintendo, who goes, done. Is beautiful. Nintendo wasn't afraid of showing you what you were actually getting, just taking some of the pixel art from the game and popping it into this template, which, might I add, looks really nice. You have the slanted title and logo, the pixel art, the space-looking background, the game type, and to top it all off, you have the Nintendo seal of quality. You know, the Nintendo seal of quality, so you knew the game isn't dog shit. The template wasn't perfect though, as some of the games just really didn't do a good job conveying what they were. I look over at my NES games sometimes only to see Gyromite and Clu Clu Land giving me the stink eye. But what about the way that you play these games though? You can't just Spike Spiegel this bitch into the wall and expect Mario to go. The NES controller was a fantastic controller for its time. 4 buttons, A, B, start, select, as well as the D-pad. First used on the Donkey Kong Game & Watch, the D-pad soon became the standard for what you would be controlling your game with. Most of the time. Before the NES controller, you'd get one of two things to control games. 1, a joystick, or 2, whatever funky shit they were cooking up that day. What is this, a phone? I'm trying to play Mario, not call my bank about canceling a credit card after it was stolen by an aggravated toddler in a Walmart parking lot at 11 p.m.
It's been a rough week.
The one complaint many had about the controller though is how the corners were uncomfortable and kind of dug into your palm. Nintendo would later fix this issue when they released the NES Top Loader, having a new revised controller to go with it. Because of how it was shaped, it was nicknamed the dog bone controller because I'd f***ing feed this thing to an animal, you telling me you wouldn't? Before that came out though, there were a couple other officially released controllers as well. The first was the NES Advantage, a controller for the hardcore gamer. Hardcore gamer. Hardcore gamer. It had a joystick, turbo buttons, and a slow motion button, which was just the game pausing itself over and over again, so how well it worked depended on if anything came up when it was paused. Nintendo also released the NES Max, which had 2 turbo buttons and a disc called a cycloid, which was just an early version of the slide pad that you'd see on something like the 3DS. There was also one other lesser known controller called the hands-free controller, which was made for those who had physical limitations and weren't able to play games with the standard controller. This controller is extremely rare, as it was only sold directly through Nintendo's customer service line, but it's really nice seeing that something like this was made in the first place. Finally, there's one last controller I need to mention. While it wasn't actually made by Nintendo themselves, instead just licensed by them, I feel like I'd be doing it a service if I didn't at least briefly mention it. That's right, it's the Power Socks!
I'm powered up. 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 Eat spam on the spot with you. Go, Kip McAllister, go. Go.
I love the Power Socks. They're so bad.
Developed by Mattel and AGE, Abrams and Gentili Entertainment, in the US, and released by a company called PAX in Japan, the Power Glove was a controller where you could turn your hand into the controller. The controller was released in October of 1989, and people went nuts over the thing. It sold like crazy when it was first released, and was the big item on many kids' Christmas lists that year. If only I could say the same about the following Christmas, though. As cool as it might look, the Power Glove didn't really work all too well with the majority of games on the system, and was crazy prone to problems like a delay in inputs or it outright just not registering inputs. The device for sure had potential and worked well enough with games that were specifically designed with the Power Glove in mind, but by the time one of these games did actually come out, Super Glove Ball, it was far too late for the Power Glove. The main reason the controller still gets as much attention as it does is because of just how iconic it is. It's definitely made a place in gaming and pop culture as this really cool looking piece of gaming history. Because if it's good enough for Lucas Barton, then it's good enough for me, damn it. The system itself, its games, its add-ons, its controllers, its undergrowth, its revisions, and its impact, I think that pretty much covers it. Nintendo showed people what gaming could be, and without them, there's a good chance that gaming would just be remembered as an old fad or brief craze from back in the 70s and 80s, or at the very least, wouldn't nearly have the same following surrounding the medium that it does now, instead being a much more niche thing. If the Famicom and NES had never come out or made the impact they did, then games as a whole wouldn't be the same as we know it today. With the system's success, it would lead to the creation of other competing consoles, like Sega with the Genesis and the company's later consoles, and even later down the line with Sony and the creation of the PlayStation. Then would come Xbox, and we all know how things turned out with everything now. Thanks to Nintendo revitalizing the games industry with the launch of this f***ing shoebox of a console, we've been able to have all of the great experiences and games that we have now, both from Nintendo and from other companies as well. It's really weird to think that we owe so much of our enjoyment in this medium, at least to a degree, to the creation of the breadbox, I mean the NES. I mean, without the power pad existing, how else would I be able to get fit and have fun at the same time?
It's time to get fit, get wrecked. It's time to get jacked, and don't look back. Don't you know, man, that it's time to get in the game. Some might stare